prefixes in a contrived example, but can everyone see that, or is that just totally unreadable? You can see it, yeah? Okay, cool. So, vendor prefixes are something that everyone got very proud about, you know, about 6 months ago. And I seem to get over it. Probably because of that, because you can write your own. There are a lot of helpful things out there already written for you. This is just an example. Border radius. If you want to do rounded corners on an element to make it look pretty, you've got to write out 4 different lines of CSS. You've got in WebKit, your Mars, and your Opera. I don't think Internet Explorer does it for border radius, which is why I left it out, but I could be wrong. I know it does it for some things, but yes, MS for most things. Yeah, so instead of writing all that out again, readable code, border radius, 5 pixels. If I want to come back and change it, yeah, easy. Trying to make a living out of doing websites. Okay, so talking about these sort of mixins and helper things, if you're going to use Sass, you might as well use Compass, which is basically a Sass extension. 2 main things for me that it does. It comes with a bunch of helpers for you, a lot of CSS3 stuff. I've been doing a lot of mobile applications for medical and sort of pharmaceutical stuff over the last 18 months on a part-time contract. And a lot of the designs seem to come with gradients on them. So there's a lot of multi-stop gradients and sort of thing. Because they only wanted these apps for iPad, it was really nice to be able to use CSS gradients. Instead of using an image, I can just define my colours. My colour stock's great. So I thought, when I got a chance to work on some other projects, I thought, oh yeah, I'll use some of that. Quickly found if anyone's used the ColorZilla gradient generator online, you can just plug in your colours, you can import an image, and it will spit out all the CSS for you. What I quickly discovered is there are 2 different versions of the spec for CSS gradients, and which pertain to various different browsers, various different implementations. And then there are about 5 or 6 different vendor prefixes. So if you want to write a gradient, for the sake of having a nice little fade, you've got to write maybe 7 lines of CSS in 2 different syntaxes, and it just made my head hurt. Compass provides you with a linear gradient mix-in, so you just type include linear gradient, red to green, whatever, and that's it. And it'll spit out all that code for you, again, abstracting away, more readable, more maintainable. So we've got these problems of maintainability versus performance. But there's a sort of secondary problem, which I'm not quite sure where it fits in, but it's nevertheless it's a problem that we all come across and we all think we've solved quite quickly, which is the grid. So, like Sam was saying, used to have 960 grid, no problem, push, push, push. When you talk about responsive, you have different things going on, maybe columns strip down, whatever, stack underneath, come to that in a minute. Train of thought. Yes, so what you often end up with is using CSS Framework. That's great. All this work's been done already. I can use Twitter Bootstrap, I can use Inuit CSS, I can use Skeleton, I can use Zerf's Foundation. Great. Of course, you can already use it with Sass. Just import it in. And some of them are starting to be released as Sass, which is great because you can customize them in the files. I think Zerf's Foundation does that, and I think I'm right in saying version 3 of Twitter's Bootstrap does that as well. I'm not sure it's released yet. Which is great. So you've got, I mostly use frameworks for grids. I don't utilize a lot of the other stuff, but that's just me. So all the hard work's done, great, sorted, apparently. I have one big problem with CSS frameworks, which is that you end up a lot of the time putting presentational classes in your markup, so which is bad. So if you think about a typical layout, I think you were talking about this earlier, where the sort of de facto idea for responsive grids was on desktop or large screens, I have a nice column layout, and then on mobile, you just go and stack vertically. Yeah. which to me, as you said, boring as hell. But anyway, I'll get to that in a second. So, by the way, I had endless fun with Code. I don't know if people have been using it a lot, but this was the first time I used it, and yeah, real fun. So, basic sort of layout, 12-column grid. This is based on, got an article spanning 6 columns width, you've got a list of latest posts, 3, and then your soon-to-be doing Twitter widget is taking them 3 columns. Now, you can see over here, the way Foundation sort of show you in their example of how to do this is have my main content div has a class of row, depicting row, and then I just stick a columns class on anything I want to be a column and tell it how many columns I want it to take up. A lot of fun playing about that on my first responsive website. But yeah, it's sort of if you've got that presentation defined in the markup, which is supposed to be your content rather than the presentation, it kind of limits your thinking. And coming back to that sort of idea of just stacking everything vertically and how that's really, really boring, what Foundation or similar frameworks would have you do is something akin to this. So the same layout, but it's going to get messy quick. If I respond that down, so you've got a more efficient use of space there, so your article's still taking up 6 columns, now the full width of the screen or the viewport, because that's the main content that deserves the space, and then 2 secondary widgets stacked side by side, because I've never come across a case where on say this sort of tablet size screen I want a Twitter widget to be spanning the whole width of the screen. And again, it's quite hard to design things that look nice at this size and then this size. But getting back to my point, the way that Foundation would have you write this in your HTML is to just, we'll just stick another class on it. So at small screen sizes, I want my article to be 12 columns, not 6 columns, what we're talking about. And then these ones at small can be 6 and 6. Again, you're just adding more presentation into that content layer, which, as we all know, is a bad thing. Or it might not be, feel free to challenge me. But I think we have a solution for this. So that's for the rest of you once again. There are 2 approaches you can use for responsive grids that do interesting things. You can either use a Sass grid library. 2 I've come across are Suzy and Zen grids. I've only actually used Suzy. I kind of liked how that worked. It was really readable and really presentationally semantic. Basically, you get a bunch of mix-ins where you can set, firstly you set up your grid variables. So you say, my grid width is 960, say, my gutter width is 20 pixels, and then you get a bunch of mix-ins that just says, you can just write, this element is 4 columns wide. No nasty CSS rules, no floats hanging about, floating about.
We're using that on the ThreadUp site.
Super.
So ThreadUp.github, you can see that's some examples. That all code's there as well.
Wicked. Top. Example case in point there then. And I really like that. The only thing I had, I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so my second approach is, I mentioned Extend earlier, which is, I think, by far my favorite Sass feature. My idea is that you can still use all these CSS frameworks, Foundation, Twitter, whatever, even if they're not Sassy, you can still use them, but just instead of actually putting their classes in your markup, have in your markup just those those semantic classes, so your article, your latest post, your tweets, the things that actually are relevant to the content, or describe the content, and then extend framework styles onto those. So we'll just run through how Extend works and sort of how it compiles down with a basic example first. Right, okay. So, so lame. Get rid of that. Okay. So in the CSS here, you can see we've got defined a button class, a little bit of padding, nice bit of border radius, bottom border, grey background, this boring default button, white text, bold font, clear text shadow, whatever. Great. But nowhere in the markup have you got a button class. And this is a bit of a contrived example because buttons possibly a useful class to have in the markup button. So down here, we've got the two classes that actually do appear in the markup, confirm and cancel, and you can see they just extend the default button styles and just inherit all those styles. So if you've done object-oriented programming, then you already know how this works, because you know about inheritance and all that. And then you just override those default styles with anything else that you want. So that's the basics of how it works with a really silly and contrived example, but then where it sort of comes into its own, the frameworks, is here we've got that same layout where you've got your article taking up 12 columns, and then 6 and 6. But in the markup, I've just got main content, nice and semantic, article, posts, tweets. Just classes that describe the content you can hook into. One class per element, nice and neat. And then in CSS, scroll past the foundation, you can import libraries into CodePen, but then you can't extend classes from them, which is really frustrating. Okay, so my main content just extends row. My article element extends small 12, large 6, and obviously columns. To me, that is incredibly readable. It's incredibly maintainable. All the things I've been harping on about, it does all that. And again, here, small 6, large 12, columns, and that's it. You're never going to see all the stuff that's above. I will just hop back to the buttons example actually, because I wanted to show you how extend compiles down to regular CSS. Right, okay, yes, so CodePen's a nice feature. You can use Sass and then you can switch to see what you compile down to. So this is what...
You can also use Emmet now as well. You can use Emmet.
Oh, cool.
Use that in CSS as well.
Wicked. Yeah, so basically what extend does is it finds your the class that you're extending and just adds your selectors to that rule set. So I've got .button, .confirm, .cancel, all find this rule set, and then down below it'll have written out the overrides. So the green background and border on the yes button and the red on the no. So it's very neat in that way. It's quite dry is a big phrase for JavaScript and CSS these days. Don't repeat yourself. So you're ending up with negligible extra amount of actual output CSS for all this repetition. The thing I was going to say about extend versus using a grid library with Sass is about file size. So when you use a mixin, it spits out all the styles generated by the mixin into that selector where you've used the mixin. So you will end up with grid libraries, a lot of repeated blocks of the same CSS. So when I use Suki, I found that throughout 10 different positions in my quite small site in the CSS file, 10 different positions, I got the same bit of float left with 43.333 recurring percent margin, whatever. Which obviously it bulks up your file size, whereas extend just generates the one block of code and adds lots of selectors. To be honest, I prefer the extend way. I find it more elegant, but because most servers will gzip your CSS and your JavaScript and all that before they send it down to the client, it's not really that much of an issue. So whatever you feel most comfortable with, just go with it. Yeah, like I say, they both do the same thing. They let you write presentationally semantic code that's maintainable and modular, in that you're not creating dependency necessarily on any CSS framework in particular, because you can always go out and, I don't like Foundation anymore, check it out and just extend in a different framework. And it means that you can write these you can write these presentational classes, these presentational selectors, all the ones you've been dreaming to do for years, like giant button and all of that. And then they never end up in your HTML. So A, you have very lightweight HTML that's really reskinnable and reusable. B, when people view the source, they don't think, oh, what a chump. And again, readable. Don't end up in the markup. Just really look at the slides before I talk. Yep. Yes, so this was one of the points is, my case point was that frameworks can be bad, but you can use them in a way that is good, but you don't have to use extend to just extend framework classes. I'm a big fan of writing your own things like that make sense to you, that are readable, and then extending those into your own classes. And it works with selectors as well, so it's not just classes, you can use IDs, you can use an attribute selector. I think the limitation is it has to be the exact same selector because it doesn't actually pass the selector, it just looks at it and does the exact match. As I've been saying all the way throughout, for presentation semantics. I feel these two words often get sort of put up against each other as good versus evil. You know, I write really semantic HTML and presentational, and it's like, you know, but on the CSS side, presentation is what you're writing, it's what you're describing. So the semantics there are about writing code that you can look at it, see what it's doing, and kind of get an idea of what that's going to look like in the browser. So yeah, do it. You know, like I was saying, create shapes. I quite like it as an idea. I haven't tested it out yet. I quite like that as an idea for defining sort of typographical framework with nice, you know, things that just describe what it is, tell it like it is, and then it never ends up in markup, or do something completely different. It's up to you. So yeah, thanks for listening. And any questions, just you can shout now. Just put me on the spot if you want. I feel like Sam did it, so I should, but I'm pretty terrified.
Save for the blog.
All right, yeah. Cool, yeah. Save for the blog. All right, cheers.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.